although the Waxhaws was a terrible loss, terrible military tragedy, it became a byword for American cruelty, which was reinforced by Lord Cornwallis's order to his subordinate commanders in South Carolina to take the most vigorous measures to extinguish the rebellion in the district that you command. Now, he had a few problems, but then he had two great victories in the summer of 1780. After the fall of Charleston, Continental Congress sent a new commander to the South, General Horatio Gates, the hero of Saratoga, with a new army, and Gates was determined to win a victory to erase the memory of the surrender of Charleston. Now, he pushed his men relentlessly all night, and the Americans were tired and hungry. Many had intestinal problems by the time the American forces and the British forces kind of collided accidentally outside the little town of Camden, South Carolina. It was pure chance because Cornwallis knew Gates was coming and he was pushing to find Gates. With an army composed primarily of militia and most of them ill, the wise thing for Gates to have done would have been to pull back and go on the defensive, but he wanted that victory. And so he ordered his men to attack. Once the fighting started, the militia broke and ran. The Continentals, the regular army, fought valiantly under the leadership of Baron Johann de Kalb, who fell fatally wounded with 11 sword, bayonet, and bullet wounds. Then even the Continentals retreated, but no one outran Horatio Gates, who didn't stop until he got to Hillsborough. The road to Charlotte, North Carolina from Camden, and that was a main highway in those days, was littered with broken wagons, abandoned equipment, dead horses, and dead and dying American soldiers. If you remember the pictures of what happened at the beginning of Operation Desert Storm on the Baghdad Highway of the abandoned tanks, trucks, bodies, put that in an 18th century context, and that's exactly what you had, an utter rout of the American forces. There was now only a remnant of what had once been a Southern army left in the Carolinas to oppose the enemy, and they were at Hillsborough. But at the same time that the Continentals, the regular forces, had quite naturally had to move back to Hillsborough to save what was left of the army, you see the rise of partisan or guerrilla warfare in South Carolina. Partisans, guerrillas, insurgents, they all mean the same thing. They are local men who band together to fight the enemy in non-traditional ways. The reason that they rose up, as I mentioned earlier in that Presbyterian preacher's elder's prayer, was because of what they had done to one of their neighbors. Some of the first partisan bands actually appeared in the area around Billy Hill's Ironworks in what's now York County, South Carolina. But that didn't seem to bother Cornwallis, and particularly Banastre Tarleton, who became known for his pursuit of the enemy. He said, "Nothing will serve these people but the fire and the sword." And he also recommended to Lord Cornwallis that what he should do to South Carolina is what Rome did to Carthage: destroy everything and salt the field so that nothing will ever grow here again. So is it any wonder that particularly these frontiersmen from South Carolina got upset about the British Army of Occupation? Modern stories of guerrilla warfare, which is what people are fighting today in the 21st century around the world, one of the observations is brutality, fear, and the resulting social disorganization can only work for the guerrillas no matter who initiates it. It's a perfect description of South Carolina in 1780 and 81. And actually we can bleed that on over into North Carolina up through Charlotte and up towards Salisbury as well. There were a number of partisans, in fact dozens, but among the better known were in South Carolina, Francis Marion, Thomas Sumter, Andrew Pickens. In North Carolina, William Davie and William Lee Davidson. Now, for nearly a century after the Revolution, Francis Marion was a national hero. He wasn't just a Southern or a South Carolina hero. There are towns and counties in 17 states across the country, from South Carolina to Oregon, and in between in Ohio and Indiana, named for Francis Marion. Parson Weems, who wrote the wonderful biography of George Washington, all the wonderful children's stories people remember about George Washington, written by Parson Weems. He also wrote a biography of Francis Marion. Poets in New England wrote the Song of Marion's Men, William Cullen Bryant, one of the first great New England poets. Now, over here, have a display of books from the library here at the Society of the Cincinnati. And Francis Marion inspired fiction throughout the 19th century. The Boy is Spies with Francis Marion. The Swamp Fox, A Young Folk's Life of General Francis Marion. There are dozens of those which show you that the memory of the Revolution and the Revolution in the South was still with Americans even after the Civil War. Now, partisans or guerrillas, and I'm going to use the term partisan, that's my personal preference. What kind of tactics? I said they used different tactics. They didn't do the usual European formal thing of the army getting across a football field and lining up and shooting at one another. They fought like Native Americans. They hid behind rocks. They hit and run. They sort of had the childhood thing of he who fights and runs away lives to fight another day. Mao Zedong, the great Chinese leader who successfully conquered China through guerrilla warfare, said this is what a guerrilla or a partisan should do. Select the tactic of seeming to come from the east, but attack from the west. Avoid the solid attack, attack the hollow. Withdraw, deliver a lightning blow. Withdraw. It worked. In fact, I've had more than one military historian say it looks like he might have been sitting on the back of Francis Marion's horse when he came up with those tactics. And what it did, all of a sudden, all over the state of South Carolina, you've got these small bands, not coordinating, but they're hitting these isolated British outposts, and they're tying down British forces all over the state. And one of the frustrating things to the British is they never knew who their friends were. They never knew really who was the enemy. And so this led to an escalation of brutality in the backcountry, the frontier of the Carolinas on both sides. The chaos on the frontier of the Carolinas was in many ways responsive to what Cornwallis promulgated. He said if someone were not openly for the king, then every measure should be taken to see that they didn't cause any problems. So if you're not for us openly, then you're obviously against us. And he began to use the term civil war to describe the conflict in the Carolinas.